Hello students, the topic of today's presentation is Lagrange's theorem in group theory. In this particular presentation I assume that you have already gone through the concepts of what a group is and what do we mean by subgroup of a group, and a few standard examples of finite groups like symmetric group on n symbols and its subgroup, alternating group, dihedral group, and so on. The Lagrange's theorem is important theorem in group theory, and the video is prepared for students who are going through their first course in group theory. Okay. Lagrange proposed this theorem or a version of this theorem way back in 1770, when actually group theory per se, the term group theory did not exist. But he wrote a theorem in the context of theory of equations, in particular in an attempt to find out the formulae for roots of a polynomial of degree 5. The formulae for the roots of polynomials of degree 2, 3 and 4 were well known at that time, and several mathematicians were trying to solve a polynomial equation of degree 5. So in that context, Lagrange wrote a theorem which could be interpreted in the language of group theory as order of a subgroup divides order of a group if group G is a finite group. Okay. So we are going to see the proof of Lagrange's theorem today and some of its applications. Lagrange's theorem. Let G be a finite group and H be a subgroup of G. Then order of H divides order of G. This symbol means divides, order of H divides order of G. So let's see how to prove this. Okay. Alright. So in the proof what I do is I form an array now by using elements of H. So suppose order of G is n and order of H is m. Okay. So suppose H has m elements. So we want to prove that m divides n. Okay. So I write elements of H like this. So H I write as, so there are m distinct elements in H. Okay. So I write as A1 equal to say identity element. H is a subgroup, so it will have identity element. A2, A3 and say AM. So these are suppose m elements of H. Now I take some element of G which is not in H. Okay. So let B belong to G such that B does not belong to H. And then I multiply these elements by H, by G, by B now. Okay. So I denote this by H times B. That means to each element of H, I multiply from right by the element B which is in G but not in H. So I get elements. So identity into B, that is B, but I write A1B which is B itself because E is identity element, A2B and so on up to AM times B. Then suppose all elements of G are exhausted, then G will have 2 times m elements if I prove that all these elements are distinct, of course. Okay. But I continue this. Suppose there is some element of G which is neither in H nor in HB. I take that element and again multiply to each element of H to form the third row of this array. So I am forming an array consisting of elements of G by using elements of H. So suppose C is an element of G such that C is neither in H and C is also not in H times B. So some element of G is not appearing, suppose in H as well as HB. I take that element and again multiply to each element of H. That is, I form this set of the type H times C, which is A1 C, A2 C, and so on, AM times C. Now I again try to find out some element of G which is not in any one of these three sets. So if I can find out, then I form one more set like this. So one more array of this, one more row of this array. Okay. So I continue this process. Okay. Continue the process. Okay. And ultimately, suppose I form some arrays like this. Then all elements of G are exhausted. I continue this process up to that. So the process continues until all elements of G are exhausted. So continue the process till all elements of G are covered or exhausted. Okay. All right. Now we have an array like this. So can you see the array? A1, A2, AM, A1B, A2B, AMB, A1C, A2C, AMC, and so on. Okay. So if I prove that in each row I have distinct elements and no two rows have a common element, then I have proved that the number of elements in G must be multiple of number of elements in H. Okay. So what I need to prove is that if I take any row, then the elements in that row are distinct. Now is that clear? Is that obvious? Because H is a subgroup, okay, and G is a group. If I take some element, suppose A1B and A2B, then suppose A1B is equal to A2B, then A1 is equal to A2. But then that means, okay, A1 is not equal to A2. We already know this because elements of H are distinct. So once the elements of H are distinct, elements in any row are also distinct. Okay. So for any, suppose G, for any G, if, okay, AIG is equal to AJG, then G being a group, we can multiply by G inverse from right and we have AI equal to AJ. Okay. But of course, these are all distinct elements of H, so that cannot happen. So this AIG also cannot be equal to AJG. So elements in any row of the array are distinct. That is first observation. Okay, this is important observation. Now, if I take this row in the array and this other row in the array, I want to show that elements are not repeating. Okay, so any two rows have no element in common. Okay, so suppose if I take some AIB and AJC, then these two elements cannot be equal. Okay, why? So suppose AI times B is equal to AJ times C. Okay, then what happens? Then if I multiply by AJ inverse from left, I get AJ inverse AI B is equal to C. Now AI, AJ are elements of H, and H is a subgroup. So this AJ inverse AI is also some element in H. Okay. So some element in H is of the type AK. So this AK times B is C. So C has already appeared in this previous row, earlier row. But that is not true. We have taken element C which is not appearing in previous rows in that array. So it cannot happen that some element in one of the rows is equal to some other element in the other row. So no two elements are common. No two rows have element in common. Okay. So no two rows have an element in common. Now are you through? Are we through? Because we are continuing the process till all elements of G are exhausted. So all elements of G are written in this array. Any row, if you take, then all elements are distinct, and no two rows have an element in common. So suppose there are k such rows in this array. Each row has m distinct elements, and there are k distinct rows in this array. The number of elements of G must be k times a. Okay. So if we have k such rows in this array, then order of G must be equal to k times n. That is, order of H divides order of G. So that completes the proof. Okay. So friends, if you look at the proof of Lagrange's theorem in any modern textbook, you will see that the language of cosets is used. Okay. We have avoided that language, but essentially the proof is same. Because this HB that I have written, you will see in your books that HB is called as a right coset of H formed by the element B. HC is a right cosets. Okay. So essentially the proof consists of showing that elements of G are divided into cosets. Any two cosets are either identical or disjoint. Okay. And H itself is one of the cosets. And any two cosets have same number of elements. All this is incorporated in this particular idea. H is one of the cosets. Okay. Any two cosets have same number of elements. Okay. And any two cosets, distinct cosets, are disjoint. So in that language perhaps you will see the proof in any standard books. But this is in some sense classical version of the proof, where we can just look at this array and convince ourselves that order of H divides the order of G. Now let us see some direct applications, some corollaries of Lagrange's theorem. Okay. So let's see corollary 1, suppose. Okay. Before going to corollaries, the main thing that Lagrange's theorem says that if you take any finite group, then there is restriction of what could be a subgroup. So suppose if you consider S3, so order of S3 is 6. So this theorem directly tells us that S3 cannot have a subgroup of order 4. So it can have subgroup of order 2 or subgroup of order 3. Okay. So if you take G, then think of only divisors. Okay. And the other numbers, there cannot be subgroups corresponding to that. Okay. Of course, we are going to see that in some sense the converse of the Lagrange's theorem is not true. Okay. That if some number divides the order of G, then there need not be a subgroup of that order. Okay. We are going to see that. Okay. Let's first see the simple corollaries. So if G is a finite group, and suppose some x belongs to G, then order of x divides order of G. Okay. What is order of x? Order of x is the smallest positive integer, say n, such that x raised to n equal to identity. Okay. So I hope that you have already gone through this concept. So you consider powers of x, x square, x cube, and the first time you hit identity element as power of x to the power n, that is order of x. Okay. So that number must be divisor of the order of G, and proof is very simple, because you must have come across with the cyclic subgroups of G. So you can take any element of G and generate a subgroup of that group by that element. So I take x and consider subgroup generated by x. So consider, I denote it by suppose this, the cyclic subgroup of G generated by x. Okay. This subgroup is nothing but, G being a finite group, this subgroup is nothing but x square, x cube, and say x to the power k. Suppose identity, suppose order of x is k, then the cyclic subgroup generated by x will look like this. Okay. Then we want to show that this k must divide the order of G. But now that is very clear, because this is a subgroup, and order of this subgroup, okay, order of this subgroup is exactly k. But order of any subgroup divides the order of group. So directly we get that k must divide k, which is order of x, must divide order of G. Okay. So order of any element in a group divides the order of the group. Okay. That is one simple consequence of Lagrange's theorem. Second consequence is, suppose let us take a particular case that order of group is a prime number. So suppose order of G is P, a prime number, prime. Okay. Then what do you expect? See, order of G itself is a prime. So order of any subgroup divides order of group means what? What could be subgroups of G? Only subgroups of G could be singleton identity element, that is subgroup of order 1, or whole of group G, which is subgroup of order P, because only divisors of P are 1 and P. Okay. So in that case, as a consequence we get that then G is cyclic. Proof is simple, because you take any x in G, so let x be any element in G, which is not identity of course, okay, other than identity, and then consider the cyclic subgroup generated by x. Okay. That being a subgroup, its order must divide order of G, but order of G is a prime number. Okay. So cyclic subgroup generated by x, okay, its order must divide P, where P is a prime, because its order must divide order of group. Here we are using Lagrange's theorem. So that implies that the cyclic subgroup generated by x must be the whole group, because the only possible divisor other than 1 is P. So this cyclic subgroup is of order P, but G itself is of order P. So that subgroup generated by x must be G. That means what? G has a generator. Okay. So G is cyclic. Alright. So every group of prime order is cyclic. That is one important consequence of Lagrange's theorem. Third corollary that I would like to discuss is the famous Fermat's little theorem. What is this theorem? That if A is some positive integer, okay, A and P are co-prime numbers, P is a prime, okay, so I use standard notation, P is a prime, okay. So this means P does not divide A, this essentially means P does not divide A. Then A raised to P minus 1 is congruent to 1 mod P. So this is Fermat's little theorem. Now there are several proofs, but one proof will follow from Lagrange's theorem. Okay. So you must have seen the groups of integers modulo n and the multiplicative group of units of Zn. So in particular, if I take Zp, okay, and the units in Zp, that is elements in Zp which have a multiplicative inverse, but then P is a prime, so any number between 1 and P minus 1 is co-prime with P, therefore this, let me denote this as Zp star, the multiplicative group of units, in Zp. Okay. So consider this group. Okay. Then if I take, so what is the order of this group? Order of this group is P minus 1. Okay. So order of Zp star is P minus 1. So this is a group of order P minus 1. Now if I take any element A in this Zp star, that is if I take any integer which is co-prime with P, so this A I can think of as an element in Zp star because this being co-prime with A, okay, so A belongs to Zp star, in fact A does belong to Zp star, okay, so let me write as A belongs to Zp star, order of A must divide P minus 1, okay, order of A must divide P minus 1 because order of element divides order of group and order of Zp star is P minus 1. So P minus 1 must be a multiple of this order, so order of A times some say K. Now order of A means A raised to that is identity. So A raised to P minus 1 must be identity in Zp star. So A raised to P minus 1, okay, must be an identity element in Zp star. That means it must be 1 mod P. Okay. So because this will in turn implies A raised to P minus 1 is equal to A raised to order of A times K, which is identity in Zp star, okay, and that therefore this will follow that A raised to P minus 1 is congruent to 1 mod P, okay. So these are three immediate consequences of Lagrange's theorem. Okay, as I told you that the converse of the Lagrange's theorem is not true. Now in what sense? That is, if G is a finite group of some order suppose, and if you think of its divisors, then we need not have a subgroup of every divisor corresponding to every divisor. So for example, this is standard example you will see in every textbook. So consider A4, okay, this is standard notation. So this is alternating group on 4 symbols. So this is subgroup of S4, okay, consisting of all even permutations, okay. Then order of A4 is what? Order of A4 is 12, okay. The order of S4 is 24, order of A4 is 12. Now what are divisors of 12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, okay. So we will show that A4 does not have a subgroup of order 6, okay. Though 6 divides 12, A4 does not have any subgroup of order 12. So we show that A4 has no subgroup of order 6. Order 6. Okay. Suppose there is a subgroup of order 6, then we will get a contradiction. So suppose H is a subgroup of A4 of order 6. Okay. Now the way we wrote those rows in the array in the proof of Lagrange's theorem, okay, how many rows will be there if we consider H? So H has order 6, okay. So suppose if we list the elements of H, okay, so H if we list as A1 is suppose identity, A2, A3, A6, so these are elements of H. So subgroup that we have assumed, suppose there is a subgroup of order 6. Now if we take some other element which is not in H, okay, A4 has 12 elements, so now still 6 elements are remaining, okay. Now let us look at all elements of A4 first of all. Before going further, let us look at all elements of A4, okay. So these are all elements of A4, okay. So this is a 3 cycle and its inverse, okay. So there are such 4 3 cycles and their inverses, so there are in all 8 3 cycles. You can see that there are 8 3 cycles in A4, and then these 3 elements which are product of disjoint transpositions 1 2 3 4 like this, okay. So every 3 cycle is a even permutation, and these are product of 2 transpositions, so by definition they are even, and these are precisely the elements of A4, okay. So look at 3 cycles. How many 3 cycles are there? There are 8 3 cycles. And how many elements are there in H? There are 6 elements in H, because we have assumed that H is subgroup of order 6. So all those 8 3 cycles cannot be in H. So at least one 3 cycle is not in H, suppose. So let G be a 3 cycle in A4 which is not in H, okay. Then that precisely will form the other row in that array. So one row was, we had elements of H, that is A1 equal to identity and so on, A6, okay. Then this, if I multiply by G, exactly same logic I am following. We thought of element B which is not in A, then we formed HB, then we formed HC and so on. But here what is going to happen? This A1 times G, okay, A1G, that is G itself because this is identity, A2G and so on, A6G. We already saw that for any group G and any subgroup, okay, all elements of G are exhausted, then no 2 elements in any row are equal, and these 2 rows have no element in common. So this will be precisely only 2 rows in that array. There will be only 2 rows. So all 12 elements I have written. All 12 elements of A4 I have already written. So G is a 3 cycle. So G square is also a 3 cycle. Okay. You see here. So if this is G, this particular element is suppose G, then this is G square, because G square is G inverse. Okay. This is G, this is G square. You can check. So G square is another 3 cycle, and that must either belong to H or belong to this, because all elements are divided into these 2 rows. Okay. So let us consider case 1 where suppose G square belongs to the first row, that is this H. G square belongs to first row, but H is a subgroup, so I can multiply by G inverse and I get that G belongs to H. Okay, but I have taken element G which is not in H. So this is a contradiction. I chose element G which was not in H. But if G square is in H, I get G belongs to H, a contradiction. Okay, but if G square is not in this row, it must be in this row. Okay, so let's see that case now. So G square is in the other row, suppose HG. Okay, now G square is in H times G means what? It must be of the type what? So this implies G square must be some H, some element H in H times G. Okay, alright. So if I multiply by G inverse from left, so this implies G inverse belongs to H. Okay, this is some element in H. So G inverse or G belongs to H. If I multiply by G inverse from right, okay, I again get G belongs to H, which is again a contradiction. This is again a contradiction. So in any case, G will belong to H. Okay, in other words, if there is a subgroup of order 6, then every 3 cycle must be in H. But there are 8 3 cycles. We saw that there are 8 different 3 cycles in A4. So we cannot have such a subgroup. Okay, because in both the cases we get a contradiction. So there is no subgroup of order 6. Subgroup of A4 of order 6. So that shows that the converse of the Lagrange's theorem is not true, that 6 divides 12, but there is no subgroup of order 6 in A4. Okay. Thank you very much.